In today's video, I'll show you how to create a dynamic sortable list. This functionality allows users to organize items according to their preferences. Here are the features we'll cover. First, we'll add items to the sortable list. Click the plus button to input skills in the form modal, then press enter to submit. Next, we'll remove items from the list. Click the X button to remove a list item. We'll then persist data using local storage. Changes will be saved, even after reloading the page. Finally, we'll make the list sortable with the drag-and-drop API. I'll show you how to utilize various drag-and-drop events in order to swap items' positions. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into coding. Let's kickstart our project by building the HTML structure. Inside the body, add a main element. Then add the title and description for the sortable list. Just below it, create an ordered list with the class skills. We'll add the list items in the following structure. We'll use span for the skill name and button for deletion. Duplicate the list items, then add a dragging class, as well as the draggable attribute. Then below the ordered list, add a div to show a message when the list is empty. Next, we'll style it with CSS. First, set the base styles for all elements. Next, make the body full height and center the contents with flexbox. For the main element, add the following styles. When setting the width, we'll use clamp to make the main content adaptable to different screen sizes. Next, let's apply general styles for different button states. For the skills ordered list, remove the default list styling and display it as grid. Then, initialize a rank counter. To create consistent spacing, we'll define a variable for the size of our list items. Then, set the styles as follows. Use flexbox to vertically align the contents inside the list item. To indicate that a list item is draggable, let's set the appropriate cursor. When dragging the list item, we'll make it slightly transparent to provide visual feedback. We'll add a number before each list item using a pseudo element. Increment the rank counter here and set as content for the pseudo element. We'll also set the size using the variable defined earlier. Also, use Flexbox to center the counter. And ensure it retains its size by setting Flex Shrink to 0. Here, let's make the span flexible to fill available space. Then use these three properties to truncate long text with ellipses. As for the buttons, apply the following styles. And once again, use Flex Shrink to maintain the button size. Next, we'll initially hide the message that appears when there are no items in the list. If the list is empty, we'll display the message to the user. Back to HTML, let's create a button to add new skills to the list. Then, create the skill modal using the dialog element with this form structure. We'll add an input and give it an ID. Then in CSS, we'll set the size and shape of the Add Skill button. Position it fixed at the bottom right. When the dialog is open, we'll center it on the screen and change the default appearance. As for the form inside the dialog, we'll set the layout as follows. And for the input, we'll make sure it's full width. Then we'll apply some basic styles. Here, we'll style the dialog backdrop with a dark background. Add a blur effect with backdrop filter. and indicate that it's interactive with cursor pointer. We don't see the backdrop since the dialog is not in modal mode. So, remove the open attribute in HTML and make it a modal with JavaScript. But before that, let's ensure the code runs only after the HTML loads. Here, select the dialog element, then invoke the showModal method. As you can see, the backdrop shows since the dialog is now in modal mode. Next, we'll show the skill modal only when we interact with the Add Skill button. So, let's select that button and add a click event listener. The skill modal can be closed with the escape button, but let's close it also when the backdrop is clicked. Due to event propagation, the click event from inside the modal will be caught as well. So we'll close the modal only if the clicked element is the modal itself. As you can see, the modal is closed upon clicking the backdrop, and it remains open even if we clicked inside the modal content. Now, we can begin adding items to the list. Let's select the skills element first. Next, define a function to create the list item element. Then, select the form within the skill modal and attach a submit event listener. Here, prevent the default form submission behavior. Next, retrieve and trim the skill value from the input field. Ensure the skill is not empty before adding it to the list. Next, we'll close the modal and reset the form after adding the list item. With that in place, let's test adding new items. And that concludes adding items to the list. Now, let's focus on removing items. Here, let's attach a click event listener on the skills element. We'll use event delegation to handle clicks on dynamically added buttons. This avoids adding multiple event listeners for each button. We'll add a condition to see if the clicked element is the remove button. Next, we'll find the parent list item of the button. Then, remove that list item from the skills element. Now, we can delete a list item by clicking the Remove button. Notice that removing an item doesn't update the ranking, therefore leaving a gap. We need to ensure the rankings remain continuous. So, let's create a function to update the CSS counter. Recall that we defined a counter for the skills element in the style sheet. We'll use this counter to update the rankings by resetting it and applying the rank counter again. Here, we'll use set timeout with a delay of 0 milliseconds. This allows the browser to run the style reset before applying the rank counter. Next, we'll call this function after removing an item. Now, the rankings stay continuous and up to date. And that wraps up removing items from the list. Moving on, let's save the list using local storage. First, create a function to save the list items to local storage. First, we'll select all the span elements within the list items. Then, convert the result from a collection to an array. Lastly, use the map function to extract the text from each span. We'll store the result as a new array and log it to the console. Then, call this function whenever the list is modified. As you can see, we get an array of the updated skills list. Back to the function, convert the list items to string and save it to local storage. Open the Developer Console and navigate to the Application tab. As you can see, the list items are successfully saved in local storage. Next, let's display the list items when the page is loaded. Here, create a function to load the list items. Retrieve the list items from local storage and convert it back to array. Then for each item, we'll create the list item element and append it to the skills list. Lastly, invoke the load items function. As you can see, the skills list is now loaded from local storage. And that concludes the local storage integration. Now let's make the list sortable using the drag-and-drop API. Currently, dragging a list item does nothing. In the createListItem function, set the draggable property to true. Now the list items can be dragged around. To provide visual feedback, add the dragging class we made in the CSS earlier. In the creation of list item, attach a drag start event listener and add the dragging class. Now, the list item becomes semi-transparent when dragging starts. When dragging ends, let's revert to the original style. So attach a drag and event listener to the list item and remove the dragging class. Now that we've handled the draggable items, let's focus on the drop zone, which is the skills element. First, attach an event listener for dragging over other items. Then log the item being targeted or dragged over. As you drag over the skills element and other list items, you'll see many results. We only care about the list item to swap positions with the dragged item. So, get the closest list item in the code. Next, select the dragged item with its dragging class. Usually, we'd use the Data Transfer API, but we'll do it this way for now. Next, check if target exists, as it can be empty when dragging over the gap between items. Also, ensure we are not swapping the dragged item with itself. Next, to see if we're dropping below or above the target element, we need to know its midpoint. From the CSS, we know the list item's height is 36 pixels, so its midpoint is 18 pixels. But all list items have the same height and same midpoint. So, we also need to get the target element's position relative to the viewport. What we need is the target's top position, plus half of its height to get the actual midpoint. For that, we can use getBoundingClientRect to get the top position and height. Here, the height remains fixed, but the top increases as you go down the page, and decreases as you go up. Now, we can calculate for the midpoint. Next, check if the mouse's vertical position on the page is greater than the midpoint. If it is, the mouse is below the target element, so insert the dragged item below it. Otherwise, insert the dragged item above it. Now, you can see the drop location as we drag over the list items. When dragging an item, it appears to return to its original location, though the content updates. This happens because elements are not valid drop targets by default. We need to tell the browser that the skills element is a valid drop target. To do this, prevent the default behavior. Now that we've fixed that, let's check the local storage. You can see the stored data isn't updated even though the list is changed. To sync local storage, we need to call the save items function. But we won't do this in the dragover event, as it can be triggered multiple times. Instead, we'll save the items when the dragged item is dropped. So, add an event listener for the drop event on the skills element. Once again, prevent the browser's default behavior for handling the drop event. Then, call the save items function here. So we've synced the local storage, but there's one more thing to address. If we drag a list item outside the skills elements and try to drop it, the list has been updated, but not the local storage. This is because our drop handler is only attached to the skills element. So we need to save the list item's last location before the mouse leaves the skills element. So back to the create list item function. In the dragon event handler, invoke the save items as well. This ensures the list is updated correctly, even if the item is dropped outside the skills element. And with that, we have made the skills list sortable. That's it for this tutorial. We've successfully created a dynamic sortable list using the drag and drop API. Thank you for following along. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave a comment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.